A lot of men feel tired, flat, not motivated now. And I think that's an endemic thing in society. I think they say about 1 in 4 men are now classed as inactive. So what do you think is going on underneath the surface?
I think it's a combination of our environment changing over the last 50 to 100 years, where movement has been engineered out. Before we were more physically active in minutes per week, not because we had higher gym membership, because we didn't, not because more people were running, because we didn't. We just had more movement for daily life. But now, whether it is even the remote control, that means you don't go up to the TV to press the buttons. Like, you probably remember that. I don't, I'm too young. But whether it's the sort of robot mower or Hoover that does that bit for you, like, all these kind of bits of our daily life has been engineered out. And so now we have to fit it in. And that makes it much harder because our brains are wired to want to be efficient, because it'd be mad not to be. And imagine back in the day when food was scarce and someone goes, I'm just going to go for a run. They're going to be like, why? Like, it's like a death wish, essentially. You're risking your life for no reason. So having to build it in, we now have to be motivated. We now have to squeeze it in. And we have so many pressures on our attention, whether it be social media, or Netflix, our life, family, etc., that finding the time, the motivation, and then the capability to do it becomes really challenging. And then it ends in this really destructive cycle where, because you've been inactive, you lose and you decondition your fitness and you become more tired. And then when you then try to do that, it becomes much more difficult. And I can see why, because I was there 10, 12 years ago. You then feel like you're trapped.
I just want to double check that you've subscribed to the show, because it really helps us continue these important conversations. Thanks. You said that modern life is, was it quietly breaking men? Why do you think that is?
It's because it's kind of out of sight in a way. Even though it's there plainly, I don't think people quite realize what the modern built environment is doing to all of us. Like, I look at getting the tube yesterday. I was taking the stairs and I was one of maybe 2 people out of 100 that I was looking around that's taking the stairs. Like, I look at those stairs as an opportunity. I must go. And not only that, there was a sign next to it saying, don't struggle on the stairs. Use the escalator. No, struggle on the stairs. And the reason you struggle on the stairs is because it makes the stairs next week easier. It then makes getting up and doing your day easier. It makes harder things easier. And so we need to get away from this constant, be careful, be cautious, to where can we introduce movement? Because rather than doing heavy weights and doing sprints that you see on someone's YouTube channel, just build in movement to your daily life. And then if you want to do extra on top of that, please do. It will do you in good stead. But it's those basic things. It's your everyday, 95% of your time that matters more than the 5% of your time that you're really focusing in and trying to do a workout.
I think a lot of guys who maybe aren't in that space yet because they are inactive and they don't eat well and they're not sleeping, whatever else, they might listen or watch this and think, I don't know, where do you start? So how would you say to a guy, what's the thing you should do first to make that journey to being healthier and better?
Okay, so the thing you should do first is either on your phone, but preferably on a piece of paper, because I want you to get off your phone, is write down what matters most to you and find 1, 2, maximum 3 things. Then identify. So maybe it's that you want to get more energy. Maybe you want to feel stronger or more confident. Okay, fine. Then I want you to think of this as further down. I want you to draw a little flow chart of what are the steps that are small enough that it feels achievable. By achievable, I want you to rate your confidence of achieving it at least a 7 out of 10. If you think of it, you go, oh, actually, no, it's a bit lower than 7. You need to make it smaller in some way, either make it less intense or, less difficult. And then have those little steps and think, okay, all these steps are going to make getting that eventual goal easier, because people always just focus in and go, okay, I want to eat better, move more, etc. And that's not really an actionable thing. That is a huge range of options. So instead, break it down into actionable things that you can do. For me, when I finally stopped doing this sort of cycling of trying to just overhaul my life to get out of the hole that I was in, I just said, okay, do you know what? I'm going to do 10 minutes of walking 3 to 4 times a week. And let me just do that. And I did that. Did it transform my life? No, it didn't. Not much. But it was the first step, and I started doing it. And I enjoyed it. Even though I didn't suddenly feel like, Mo Farah, I still felt that tiny bit better, and I felt good for myself that I actually stuck to something rather than doing it for 5-6 weeks and never doing it again. And then after that, I said, during one of those walks, I said, what should I next do? And I next said, okay, let me try and just eat 1 or 2 more pieces of fruit across the week. Okay, because I knew that if I just did it in one day, it's hard to keep that up. And then just over time, over 10, 12 years, you go from a point where, that 10-minute walk was hard work to now, like if you just said, go run a marathon, I could do that. You don't do that overnight. You don't do that over 6 months. You do it over consistent, tiny, small efforts. It's that compound interest that you get. It slowly seeps into everything else.
That is quite interesting, because if we go back to your unhappy liver days, just tell us a story of your journey to good health.
Yeah, like through medical school and through the sort of early part of my junior doctor years, it was just consistent and slow gain of weight. I'd gone from 66 kilos when I kind of entered sixth form-ish to 93, 94 kilos as I was kind of entering those first few months in kind of, junior doctor years. And at the time, like I didn't really admit to myself that I'd gained weight. Like it wasn't something that I really appreciated. I still didn't feel sort of fat. But what I ended up finding out was in a blood test, my liver function markers were off. And so they sent me for an ultrasound scan of the liver, and the sonographer was, super clear. He was just looking at it and he just looked at me and said, this is one of the fattest livers I've ever seen. And I was blown away because I was overweight, but my BMI was about 28. And so I didn't feel like it was terrible. And I shouldn't be on the top of his, charts.
No, his people skills were terrible, weren't they?
I hope that because he knew I was a junior doctor.
Oh, God, that's awful. Jesus.
Absolutely. And what I now know is that firstly, when we think about the impacts of obesity, it's not equal across people. There are huge genetic variations that, for example, people from South Asian background, they will more likely deposit fat into their organs like the liver. And so therefore the impact of obesity is not seen equally. And that's why, for example, in our referral criteria, we lower it from those ethnicities in order to try to mitigate against that kind of health inequality that can occur. And so that woke me up to realizing I've got to do something. But if you asked me, like, what symptoms did you have? I wouldn't have said anything. I'd have said that I was asymptomatic. When I went through this process over many years of doing lots of these different changes to improve my health, I then realized that I had loads of symptoms. I was tired all the time. I was also anxious all the time, short-tempered, a bit unempathetic often. And it was not until I made all these changes that I realized that I was a different person. Shanaz, my wife, would just say, your liver's improved, but you're different. You're completely different. Your outlook, the way you speak to people, your passions are just changed. And it made me think, last week, I was in the gym and I sat there and I was listening to some sort of R&B from the 2000s. And the reason I'm saying that is because I realized in that moment that so many things that I used to hate, I was now doing, because I hated R&B back then, right? I hated even the thought of the gym. I hated people even being active in front of me because I sort of had this irrational annoyance that they're just wasting their time. So I was in the gym that I wouldn't normally like. I was listening to music that I didn't like, eating food that previously I wouldn't have even classified as something I'd include in my diet. So if you feel like, this just isn't for me and this just isn't me and I don't like it, you'll come to a point where you can start to become someone else that has different likes that are more in line with your health.
In terms of men's health specifically, from more my area, average turnaround time for a man with low testosterone presenting is about 2 to 3 years that they'll have symptoms for. So, tiredness, libido, no energy, et cetera, et cetera. Why do you think men in particular are so bad at waiting until there's a serious problem before they see the doctor?
It's a really good question. And I think I put myself in that category, to be honest. I guess we love to be problem solvers. At least that's how I kind of operate. And we see getting help as potential weakness. And that vulnerability is quite scary. Even when I was diagnosed with MASL, so that's, the fatty liver disease and high blood pressure, I actually didn't attend the GP appointment that they sent me afterwards to go through the results because I think I was afraid that if I heard someone and a doctor tell me it and lay it out, that it would be real, like really real and really scary. And I didn't want to have the shame of a junior doctor that can't even look after their own health, that's like 25 and already got 2 long-term conditions. And looking back at it now, like, that's crazy. Like, what was I doing? It actually took a few years. Like, and people think that I got that diagnosis and suddenly changed my life around. No, the first 1 to 2 years after that diagnosis, I didn't really do or achieve that much. I did lots of like all-out diets and fads and this and that, and I'd get a success for a few months and then I'd be straight back. And I actually gained a bit of weight overall over those next 2 years. It wasn't until I stopped, and actually I spoke to my wife finally and said that, do you know what? Like I said, I always get a bit tearful at this point, but like, I need help. Like, how can I do this? And getting that help from her and just saying, okay, let's break it down. And she's actually went on her own physical activity journey just to facilitate me. And now she loves it now as well, and she does it. Like, it was only just to support me on that.
But this must have hit you so hard then. Like,
it was tough because I felt like,
is it because, but then, just to get back to this, you fatty liver, blood pressure, it's just, in many ways, it's not cancer. It's not an it's not a life-ending condition.
No.
And yet something must have sparked in you that went, oh my God, this is so serious. Why?
Yeah, for me, it's because my dad, who has muscled, and it went into cirrhosis,
right?
And he has all the other heart failure, chronic kidney disease, etc., all the impacts of the gaining weight and the lifestyle that he was leading.
Yeah,
hospital all the time, and just such a terrible quality of life.
Right.
And I had already I was earlier in the process. If you looked at the timeline, I was winning. And it just scared the life out of me. It scared the life out of me. And also it was the ineffectiveness of what I was trying to do just on my own.
Yeah.
It was just, it's just like I had spent 2 years and I'd gone backwards despite all the motivation. I heard of all these stories of people get diagnosed with diabetes and suddenly they change their life around. I'm like, I'm 2 years in and I've achieved 3 kilos of gained weight. And so it took a big thing to just go, do you know what? Help.
Yeah.
And just, it took a while, but then finally, once I opened up to her to get help, I opened up to others to finally get a bit of help and advice and support and not just try and do all these things on my own.
I think it does make you a good example or representative for those people that want to change. I think people that maybe just see you now as this like hyper competitive, ripped, elite athlete, going, oh God, just another 1,000 kilometers that I just run this morning. Or a photo of you at like 6 a.m. when it's dark out with 20 people. I'm just going, oh God, you dick. But actually understanding the journey is probably what's so important, because you understand, I'm not suggesting that any guy can reach this point where you have, but to make the difference between unhealthy realization and just getting to the point of health is so achievable. People want to know that they can make those changes. And I think that's where you become the great example, not to demean the achievements you do now, but the journey is the big
100%, 100%. And the thing is, like, in many ways, we always focus on the barriers, and 100% those barriers are important. But when I look back then, there were so many privileges that I had and was not fully utilizing. I was privileged to have a wife that was going to be willing, if I actually asked her to support, she would have just said, I'll do whatever it is, you tell me. But I wasn't tapping into that. I was privileged to have a job where, don't get me wrong, it's super stressful, but we earn enough that I could reduce my hours. And that was one of the things I had to accept. I just reduced the hours of work that I did. And that was one of the biggest things that helped. Rather than trying to squeeze things in, I said, look, do you know what? We're going to have to live off less. And my wife was like, 100%, that's fine. We'll live off less. Because if it means that I'm actually able to do things that are for free, moving my body was free, I don't need to work so much. But not everyone gets that privilege. So it's about trying to tap into what privilege do you have and actually use it.
Have a suggestion for a Man Alive episode or thought about something said in this episode? Comment below and I read every one. What's your opinion of weight loss medications, injections?
I have mixed views in the sense that, yes, GLP-1s and other obesity medications 100% have a place. because we know that a significant proportion, about 40 to 70% of the weight gain that we see in society has a genetic driver. Like when we think of genetics, people often think of like a single gene that causes a disease. And there are some monogenic obesity syndromes, but they're very rare. But what we see in obesity is polygenic risk. So this is where lots of different genes, normally around the regulation of appetite, kind of work together to increase people's thermostat for appetite. So the way of interpreting, let's say, whether it's marketing or foods or smells, they're more likely to then consume. We know this from studies, even in children, where we compare the impact of TV adverts of these kind of foods, it results in different calorie intake. Now, people may say, well, in the 1920s and 30s, you look at pictures on the beach and none of them are overweight. And they're right, obesity rates were much lower back then. Because what's happening is the genetics haven't changed, but the genetics don't work on their own. They work in the context of the environment they're set in. And with the new food environment, the physical activity being removed and engineered out, suddenly these genetics are producing fast increases in weight. GLP-1s can help and support in that weight loss process. But what's fundamental, and anyone who's even considering or taking them, is that they are not the solution. They are a tool. And it has to be done in conjunction with high quality lifestyle support around some key measures, in particular physical activity to preserve muscle mass, bone density, and also to increase your base, and this is the thing that doesn't get talked about, is your base aerobic work. Because when you look at studies at prevention of weight regain post-significant weight loss, the key denominator that means successful weight maintenance, it's actually amount of cardiovascular time spending physically active. And you'll be surprised, in the NICE guidance published January, February 2025, they stated it's likely that someone that's lost significant amounts of weight would need to do 60 to 90 minutes of physical activity per day. Per day. So what we need to try to achieve, firstly, that number may be unachievable for many, but we need to get as close as that as possible. And throughout this whole process of the weight journey, we need to work on building up the confidence, skills, and knowledge of being active so that becomes more achievable. So yes, injections have a place, but if you're going to use them on their own, then it may well lead to cycles of kind of weight regain. As we know, the weight regain is even faster off these.
So if you are, not just for people that have lost weight with injections, but if you're trying to get healthier, you hate the gym, what does a genuinely healthy week of movement look like then?
So the base kind of foundation is built on movement in your everyday life. I want you to have a rule. I have kind of red lines that I will not take the lift. Even if I have heavy luggage and it's 5-6 floors to the top of that hotel, I will take the stairs. And the reason being is that I'll take my time if I need to. If I get out of breath, I'll just stop for a moment, catch my breath, and then keep going.
If you get out of breath, we are screwed. We are all screwed.
I'm just being relatable.
Yeah, okay.
And the question is, okay, heavy luggage, I think of that as a blessing. I'm like, now I'm basically doing a farmer's carry up some stairs. I will not take the escalators. I will not park at the closest park in the supermarket. And the reason being, I tell myself, not only am I going to get that 200-300 meters of movement into the supermarket, I'm then going to have to carry all the shopping, which I will not bring on the trolley. I will carry it myself. I will also be less likely to have someone, knock my car because I've parked right at the end where it's empty and everyone's trying to fight for the spaces right near the front. And you may think, okay, well, those stairs, those lifts, 200 meters, that's small change. That's not going to make a difference. Stack that up over 7 days, over 12 months, over multiple years. That's a hell of a lot of movement. So firstly, build it into your daily routine. Then I want you to do the next movement that you feel you will enjoy most. I don't care what that is. If it's dancing, that's beautiful. If it is going to the gym, excellent. If it's running, find a way. But just do the movement that you want to do, not the one that some influencers said, oh, this is really good for this condition, oh, this is good. Because...
What voice is that?
Who knows who I'm trying to... But what I'm trying to say is, honestly, like what we have to try and do, if you are starting from this point, do the movement you enjoy. And then as you become more adept and more confident and you build more routine in, then look to specify. Then look to start going, okay, I'm going to try and do some more VO2 max focused training. But I get so many people that aren't even that active and go, okay, what's the best thing to do for VO2 max? What's the best thing to, how do I get into zone 2? And I'm like, mate, like, it doesn't matter. You're not moving anywhere near enough for that kind of specificity in your training should even be relevant. For example, with zone 2, unless you are doing a lot of aerobic work across multiple zones, doing zone 2 is pointless because one, zone 2 in someone that isn't particularly highly trained is very narrow. You're going to find that you're constantly going, below or above it with
So anyone who doesn't know what zone 2 is.
Has worked for it. So these are the heart rate zones. And there's different zones you can do it. Like in exercise physiology, they just talk about zone 1 to 3. But in most people, when they're using their watch, they have 1 to 5, where 5 is kind of right at the top end of your heart rate. Zone 1 is just above kind of your resting. And people talk about this kind of magical zone 2. And the reason that it's come popular, because I do a lot of zone 2 training, is kind of endurance athletes, when they have a lot of high load, and we're doing lots of zone 3, zone 4, zone 5, if you want to increase load beyond that, you have to rely on zone 2, because zone 3 and 4, there's only so much you can do before you don't have enough time to adapt from the stimulus you've put in. So if you want to increase the load without seeing injuries, without seeing continual fatigue, just increasing, you have to build in zone 2. But if you're not doing more than, I'd say, 300 minutes a week minimum, zone 2 is pointless, because zone 3 gets you more of that actual stimulation and it's more time efficient. So look, zone 2 is great if you're doing 300 minutes plus, but beyond that, just move your body. Move your body in different ways. If you feel like you can get little short intensity bursts, brilliant. If you want to go for, longer but sort of lower zone, brilliant. But don't keep looking at your watch. I see people just walking, going quicker and slower, and I'm just like, just put it away, man. Do you know what I mean? Just enjoy the movement.
From a health, medically driven benefit, do you think there's a minimum that people need to do to see reductions in blood pressure or improvements in blood sugars or lipid levels?
What I often say to people is, don't worry about the minutes per se, just worry about doing a bit more if you feel inside that you're not doing enough. And I think we often know. We know when we're doing enough and we know when we're not. And so just don't think about the numbers, because for many, in fact, 28% of the population, they do less than 30 minutes. That's significantly less than 150. 150 may feel unachievable. And so they may go, oh, well, then what's the point? Well, even if you go from 30 minutes to 40 minutes, just 10 minutes more, that has a significant increase. Even doing 500 steps more per day, in a study looking at type 2 diabetics, it reduced their risk of cardiovascular disease by 7%. Okay, 500 steps. If we can't include that as a first step that we can do to improve our health, I don't know what we can do. Small things do make a difference. And there was a study actually published last year on exercise snacking. So doing 1, 2, 3 minute bursts sort of in your day, into your routine. And it was profound in terms of the risk reduction for cancer, for cardiovascular disease. Even tiny movement bursts, like 2 minutes at a time, made a difference. So really don't think about doing movement to compete with other people or compare yourself to someone else. Just do movement as like something that you're going to enjoy, that's going to protect your health.
Do you think the way men in particular address movement changes as we age?
I think it varies, some positively, some negatively. But sadly, the reality is no matter how hard you work, as time goes on, you will no longer see personal bests. Now, if you haven't been active throughout most of your life, then actually, if you start training when you're 50, 60, you will start to hit some personal bests. But assuming that you haven't been, you have to change your focus and your reality. One of my colleagues at Parkrun was Chrissy Wellington. She's 4-time Ironman world champion, okay? She is the GOAT. And I think she said something that was really important to me, because I asked her, why is she still as active as she is now, despite, no longer having those kind of the same times and speeds, etc. And she said, I had to reframe movement. And she had to do a number of things. She actually stopped using her watch. The constant reminder that, her mile splits were so much slower than she used to do, and that everything felt harder, just didn't give her the positive energy. So instead, she would just focus on enjoying the run, pushing her body to a way that she felt like she was getting that thrill, whether that was doing it slowly or doing it fast. And you have to reframe it and bring other things in, like longevity, like health, like, being able to do the things you enjoy. That has to come with time. And so as the ages go through and the decades go through, you need to constantly reevaluate what matters most to me. Because that changes. What matters most when you're 20 is unlikely to be what matters most when you're 50.
Yeah. So maybe ditch the watch.
If that is what works for you. Everyone's different. Everyone's different. Like at the moment for me, like don't let me ditch the watch because I need it to help to specify my training. But come to me in 10 years' time, I may well have done because I now no longer am trying to shave a few seconds off or get a few more watts. And so actually the watch is not giving me helpful, positive reinforcement.
Yeah. You're involved in the active practice movement, aren't you? Just
Absolutely.
briefly tell me a little bit about what that is and how it affects patient experiences.
Yeah, so the Active Practice Charter is an initiative set up by the Royal College of GPs where we are supporting and encouraging GP practices and networks in which they collaborate with to build in physical activity for patients and staff. And there's 5 criteria. The 5 criteria are increasing physical activity in patients, increasing in staff, reducing sedentary time in patients, reducing sedentary time in staff, and then collaborating with a physical activity provider, either local or national. Now, people often come to me and say, increasing physical activity and reducing sedentary time, surely that's the same thing. It's not the same thing. I could go on a 10K run this morning and then head into clinic and sit down for 10 and a half hours. That is a lot of sedentary time. Yes, it's great that I did my 10K run in the morning, but we know that there are health impacts to staying stationary, sedentary for those periods of time without breaking it up. So it's really important that we see them as different things. And what we've seen is nearly 700 practices that have signed up. They have to demonstrate. It's not just signing up. They need to submit evidence to show that this is what we're doing to, over a long period of time, to achieve those 5 criteria. And we're trying to bring in movement because sadly, when we look at the stats of how often physical activity is discussed in consultations, it's tiny, like it's wafer thin. But then when we ask people, who would you most value hearing physical activity advice from? Healthcare professionals are on top. We actually come above fitness professionals. So it's so important that we think about doing that, especially in the context that 43% of the UK population have a long-term health condition. And that is one of the main barriers for people to get active. They're worried about its impact.
Let's move on to nutrition a little bit, because I feel I've hammered that one before. What's the one message from social media that you would like to delete about nutrition forever?
The word non-negotiable.
Oh
My goodness, mate. Everything's negotiable, okay? Like everything. Even that fried breakfast that I said, we should be careful of. Yeah, I've had some. I've had plenty. Don't worry about that. But we just need to focus on not doing amazing some of the time to just doing pretty good all of the time. And the reason that I say that is because before, I used to try to eat really healthily. And what would happen was I just had this really bad relationship with food where if I did really well for a period of time, I'd reward myself. And the reward for doing well would be like getting a Domino's or, eat a massive bag of crisps. And that's mad. Like imagine if you were drawing a beautiful painting and you did really hard work and then your reward was to just, go mental on it. Like, how is that sensible? And that relationship was so challenging. And I really appreciate and I empathize with people that struggle with the kind of cravings and the noise that they get around food. Because I used to have zero control. Honestly, Jeff, I would be at home and within a day, sometimes eat 18 packets of crisps. No joke. And I would even hide the packets. I wouldn't put them in the bin in the kitchen. I'd go outside and put them in the wheelie bin because I wouldn't want my wife to see.
God, you really like crisps.
Well, yeah, no, crisps, chocolates, all kinds of stuff. I just couldn't control myself. I would try. I'd say, I'm just going to have one bag. Then a bit would go for, and I'd just have another. And I just had zero control. It was so difficult. When I was stressed, I'd eat it. When I was happy, I'd eat it. And it took a long time to understand that I need to not try to restrict those things because it doesn't work. Instead, let me just try to have a balance and eat a little bit of healthy stuff and just slowly increase it and let those things push out. And then I realized that I need to also make the choices easier. So I said, maybe I shouldn't have crisps in the house. Maybe I shouldn't give myself the option. And so Shanaz would hide all the foods that I would struggle to control, and she would find lots of interesting places to hide. Because at first you'd hide them and then I'd find them, and all hell would break loose. So she actually once hid it, in the boot of the car where the spare tire is. Yeah. She would hide it in her boot of the car there.
Wow.
But
think how much movement you were doing trying to find the snacks. It's part of the journey.
Absolutely. And something that I realized about 5-6 years after we sort of instigated the kind of ban of it in the house.
Yeah.
And when I was out and about, I'd always just allow myself to eat it because that would be the rule. In the house, I just had no access to it. Out and about, I'd eat what I'd like. There was one time where I actually found it and it didn't trigger anything. I was like, oh, I don't really want it. And that took 5-6 years of not having it there. So those people that feel trapped in that sort of cycle of constantly struggling to control that, think about what you need to do. It may not be that. That's what worked for me. But it is possible to break this kind of really difficult, because back then I would have said it was impossible. I would never be able to break that.
This next question is not negotiable. So why do you think nutrition is so challenging and confusing for people now?
Yeah, because nutrition is far more complex than people realize. And those that sort of study it realize you have this curve where you start off, you don't know much and your confidence is pretty low. You start learning stuff and your confidence gets really quite high. You learn more and you realize, oh, actually the confidence is going down because there's lots of conflicting information. Nutritional studies are really difficult to do. Doing a randomized control trial in nutrition is impossible. People know if they're on a Mediterranean diet or they're eating a hamburger. You know what I mean? It's hard to blind that kind of stuff. And so what we have to appreciate is that we're getting people that are doing some of the homework, they're trying their best, and then they suddenly have decided that they're a nutrition expert, but they're early on in the curve. And they have such strong belief. If anyone is super confident when they're giving nutrition advice, I'd be wary. Because there is no really, really, really stable ground. Even, for example, saturated fat, which if I give on the overall of the evidence, is something that we need to limit. We need to keep to under 10% of our daily consumption. But I can find you, if you said, Hussain, we need to protect saturated fat, find me some studies that demonstrate that it's not a health impact. Yeah, I could. Yeah, in particular with hemorrhagic stroke, higher saturated fat consumption seems to lower your risk. So there is lots of contradictions, and that is actually okay if you have the understanding to interpret the data, but it then sends so many random messages. So I'd really be careful about where you get that advice from, because it can lead to some harmful consequences where people start cutting out foods that are actually really good for you. Really good for you. And we need to stop thinking of nutrition as one-dimensional. A lot of people start using those continuous glucose monitors, CGMs. Well, that's assessing your blood sugar levels. Okay, that is just one factor when it comes to nutrition. And also your blood sugar levels are far more complicated than you eat this, it goes up. Your pancreas is very intelligent, and it starts secreting more insulin when actual insulin resistance and disease pathology starts happening. It comes to a point when actually it starts to struggle to keep up, and then you start to see the impacts on your blood sugar levels. So yes, for type 2 diabetics, maybe even pre-diabetics, great evidence to use them. For those that don't have that, actually it can lead to a lot of harmful behaviors that I've seen really concerning results from.
I think that's probably representative of all areas of medicine, you'd hope. That actually, I think the more I've learned from the hormone-y testosterone world is that I should be less confident in giving strong opinions. Because you're right, that curve is where you go, and then you reach the top and you kind of go, oh God, I'm not so sure now. Because there's so much more you learn. So I think maybe the take home for this is anyone who makes 100% or, as you said, non-negotiable statements on any platform, social or other ones, we should be avoiding.
Yeah, definitely. Really. Definitely, because also they don't have the impact of that statement. Like me and you, we can't say stuff like that because we have to always stick to the evidence, and we have consequences. But these, they have no consequences. And then the amount of effort you have to take to sort of disprove what they're saying, it's crazy. They can just say it, 30 seconds, done the video, done. We have to sift through the evidence, marry it up with various bits of data, and then translate that across in a way that is just never enticing for the algorithm.
Yeah, it's the algorithm effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
A nuanced answer isn't catchy.
No.
So what does good nutrition look like for the average guy who wants to lead a healthy life, but maybe has kids and work stresses and travel?
Yeah. So where we can be confident in is if it's whole food as much as possible. If you are using an array of different ingredients from fruits, nuts, seeds, etc. If it's predominantly plant-based, then you are in a good place. If you feel like there's a lot of sort of processed food, and again, like certain processed foods, like that whole label, we got to be careful because there's good and bad within it. If you feel like the food is resulting in sort of symptoms that are negative for you as well, and you feel them and you see them, those are the kind of things to listen to. And just try to experiment with different things, but stick to the kind of principles of whole food, predominantly plant-based, lots of variety where we can, and being realistic to financial constraints, time constraints, and sort of, understanding of food. Like I think focus on what you can do rather than trying to achieve something that may not be achievable just yet.
How do you stop that becoming obsessive or restrictive?
Definitely. Well, I would say that you shouldn't feel that any food is off limits unless it causes, really negative effects that you can notice. And so I eat ice cream. I will sometimes eat fast food. And in fact, what was really nice to see, in the Eat Lancet plate, which is the sort of top nutritionists that come out to do a overall assessment of what is the best impact for human health and also planetary health, which we need to understand the impact of. It found, and it included, a small little sliver for treats, because food is more than just the macro and micronutrients that you get. Food is pleasure. Food should be something shared with other people. So it's how do we get that balance where you're not trying to restrict and be overly specific, but just understand the basic principles of including the foods that you have. And instead of focusing then on what's on your plate, I want people to focus on what's in your shopping trolley. Okay, whether that's an electronic basket or a physical trolley. Because I often see, when I look at the trolleys, a really bad mix of foods when I'm looking around. But when I speak to people, I rarely find someone that says, no, I'm not eating that well. Most people go, yeah, I'm eating all right, eating relatively healthily. The trolleys paint a different picture. So you just look at your trolley and just decide, is that the proportion that I want to buy? Because the issue is with a lot of the foods that are very appealing but unfortunately maybe not be benefiting our health, they can tempt you to buy lots of it. And they come in big packets. And you think, okay, I'm saving money, I'm just going to buy a lot of it. But in reality, we then overconsume those things and we keep that unhealthy ratio.
I can't wait to see the social media post of you eating a massive English breakfast with ice cream at the side.
Absolutely, and I will. With zero regrets.
Zero regret. That'll be the title. Yeah. Zero regrets.
100%. And I think that's so important because I sometimes go out with friends for a meal and they'll go to a restaurant and they'll eat something really boring, like rabbit food essentially. And I'm just like, and they go, God, how can you eat that? I'm just like, look, if it's about time and place.
Yeah.
I'm out for a meal, I'm going to enjoy it. Why am I going to eat some rabbit food? I can make that at home. Do you know what I mean? If I'm going to go out, I'm going to eat something a little bit more indulgent. But then when I'm at home, am I going to have, a Kit Kat and some sweets and that kind of stuff regularly throughout the week? No, I'm not. So it's about trying to find the right food at the right time so that you enjoy it to its most.
Yeah, I agree, totally. I guess the other thing you do around your fitness is the idea of community. So obviously loneliness, especially in men, is a real health issue. Don't they say it's like smoking 15 cigarettes a day or something in terms of impact on health?
Yeah.
So why do you think as a health profession, we treat community as a nice extra rather than a core health issue?
Do you know what? I fell in that trap as well. When I started educating, doing my accreditation in lifestyle medicine, really starting
to put that in there, by the way, just my accreditation in lifestyle medicine.
I used to think that physical activity, nutrition, sleep, these were the most important things.
Yeah.
And then you start to look at the research and the impact of social isolation and loneliness, which are two different things. And you start to understand that actually, this is one of the biggest levers that someone can pull to improve their health. And I'm not sure people know that. And when we look at longevity and even kind of health span, those social connections, they are one of the most impactful elements that can maintain that. And it's just so important. And the reason I think that we likely see this is because having more connections, more strong relationships, it helps develop purpose, it helps develop meaning. So when you are going through your life, if you have things to do, to achieve, to be, to support, it will naturally motivate you to do other things like sleep well, like eat better, move more. These things will just happen because you won't be able to do those things if you didn't. But if they start to go and your world starts to shrink, then actually staying up late at night, just looking at your phone or watching TV, well, it doesn't matter because you're not going anywhere tomorrow. You're not meeting anyone. Eating something when it's just you and you're not cooking for other people, well, it's not that interesting to spend time prepping a meal when it's just you. And if there's nothing to go out for, well, your walking going to be less, your steps going to go down. So it is so important to give you that reason, that reason to live in developing those connections. And as we go from 20s onwards, sadly, for the vast majority of us, they just slowly die off. Not literally die off.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah.
Sometimes they do, eventually. And we've got to protect that. And we've got to work on also constantly generating new connections because it is normal for things to just peter out. In some, whether it's geography or relationships or whatever that happens. So you need a constant influx of new connections that you're putting time and effort because they don't just happen. You don't just absorb and by osmosis new connections occur. You have to put effort.
It seems a very normal male thing though to become more isolated and grumpy as you get older. I'm often referred to as grumpy as I get older, but I don't think that's true. But yeah, it seems like a normal thing, doesn't it? I mean, are we fighting something that shouldn't be happening anyway?
I think it can feel like a safe thing to do in the same way that sitting on the sofa is a safe thing to do, but it is worth the effort. And 100%, when I look at the groups that I run, like Run Talk Run, Walk Talk Walk, I think the people that gain the most are the guys. Because actually getting women to the group is quite easy. And for a long time, we were always dominated sort of percentage-wise with women, which is great. They seek out support and brilliant, it's there. But what we started to do was more targeted approach where we would send more text messages to patients, in particular those with mental health conditions, those from male backgrounds, to try to reach out to them because they just weren't kind of absorbing what sort of promotion we'd done already. And it's just remarkable to see the impact that it's had on so many of those patients. They are just different people. And it's that connection that then drives them to be motivated, to be more active, to do more for the community. And so I really do think that our new non-negotiable, I'm going to bring that in, should be just think about how you can develop more connections where you're doing it to support other people. Because by doing that, you build a layer of armor of those that are going to look out for you. You look out for them, you support them. When you need it, they're going to be there for you.
So if I gave you, I don't know, £10 million to reduce chronic disease in the UK, what would you do?
What would I do?
Probably need a lot more than 10 million.
Yeah, well, do you know what? With 10 million, you could do a lot. That's the thing. And that's the thing that I often think about. When we look at the health challenges we've got at the moment, a lot of people say we need more appointments, the wait time's so long. When we look over the last 15, 20 years, per patient, we have 3 times the amount of appointments. That an appointment doesn't fix things. So instead of just piling money into something that isn't working, we need to actually say, let's take a tiny sliver, except that we're going to unfortunately see the impacts of not having enough appointments for the demand, and let's spend it on community physical activity provision that's based outside in nature. Because you're getting like a sort of a cocktail of effects. You're getting the benefits of being outside in nature, which we know, whether you're moving or not, helps. We get movement and we get the community element. These things are not expensive. There are charities out there that are already doing it at a fraction of the price. Imagine if every primary care network had access to community physical activity to support people's health. And you may go, okay, well, we need to get this in the NICE guidelines. They're in the NICE guidelines. If you look at the depression guidelines, right at the top, above antidepressants for low to moderate depression, they talk about group exercise. Yet we don't have access often, we're lucky where we are, but we don't have access to that for most GPs. We want people to take control of their health back. Not because we're blaming them, but because the most important member of the multidisciplinary team, it's not you, it's not me, it's the patient.
Might be me.
No, honestly, mate, it's the patient. They're on the job 365 days a week, right? They're on the job 365 days a week. They're unpaid, and they're the one that's seeing the results or the impact. So we need to get them to understand. You may think, okay, that's a huge task, and it is. But then if I look at kind of the work we've done at Parkrun, where 5-6 years ago, people viewed Parkrun as a 5K race. It was viewed as a time trial. But we now know from the data in the messaging we've been putting out, focusing on community, focusing on walking, focusing on volunteering, 20% of the people that sign up to Parkrun are in the physical inactive group. So less than 30 minutes a week. 20%. Given that 28% of the population are in that group, we're close to matching those groups. So you can change perspectives. It takes time and patience, but you can, and we need to work with patients on that.
But the problem is not to labor this too much. I think the other issue is that work doesn't, or the UK culture of work doesn't facilitate that. So you clock in, you do your job, and then you leave. If you're lucky, you have some spare time. Yeah. But you're rewarded for working longer, later, doing more things. So surely, unless we have a massive cultural shift that says actually, you should be doing something at lunch and force you away from that screen, we can't beat this.
Yeah, no, you're right. But it's already shifting. Reason being is that employers are just understanding, finally, that healthy employees, motivated employees, do better than employees that work all hours of the day, that are unhealthy, that are unproductive and struggling. They're finally realizing that. And I work a lot with lots of major companies. I won't drop them in, but they are appreciating that all they care about is getting the most out of that person. They'll be honest with me. They say, look, this is what we want to try and do. But they're starting to understand that actually just squeezing it constantly is not going to release any more juice. We now need to enrich that person, that fruit, to get more juice from it regularly. Does that make sense?
It's a strange analogy.
It is a strange.
I see where you're going.
As I went into it, I was like, I'm not sure this one will work.
No,
but
the hand gestures help.
But we do need to shift towards productivity, because what we're seeing now is huge growths in that kind of group that are off work, long-term sick. And there are work well vanguards, in fact, one in our area, and they're starting to appreciate that if they are going to get people back to healthy employment, then employment needs to be healthy. Okay, because you lose out if they're not working at all or if they're not working productively. So that shift is already happening, and it's happening because of money. And that's good. We need to focus on, actually, you will make more money if you focus on the health and well-being of those individuals. And it starts from the top down. And I think already senior managers, CEOs are starting to appreciate that they need to be on the top of their game, not just at work, but physically and mentally. And so, of course, they're going to try and translate that down to their employees. At least they should.
Do you think medicine can make patients passive in terms of activity? And why?
Yeah, definitely can be passive. I think because they've been trained to go in with a problem and leave the room with a solution. That's how they've been trained. And of course, that's then how they believe it works. Most people don't fully appreciate how the social determinants and the lifestyle factors influence disease. Many people with type 2 diabetes sit there thinking, oh, it's genetic. Yeah, absolutely. There's some genetic predisposition in there. But there are some huge drivers which are within your control that you have. And I worry why that narrative has come about. There's lots of negative ways you can think about that, but we need to totally shift it to going, actually, yes, there's things we can do, but by God, there's things you can do. And I'm relying on you to try and do those things. So we need to inspire a bit of hope, realism, and also motivation to say that, do you know what, let's work together. And that's a phrase I'll often use. I'll say, let's work together. I'm going to do my best to try to maximize what I can do, but I need you to do your best as well. And yes, it's going to be really difficult, but there is a world where we can achieve this.
So how do you sell it to a guy who maybe, like you mentioned before, isn't as good at his sport he used to be or can't run as fast as he used to be, but you want those positive outcomes?
So using that specific person, and I've got a few patients right in mind, is I then sit down and go, okay, so what matters most to you? Often they'll then say is, look, do you know what matters most to me is my family is making sure that my kids are sorted. They're coming to the age where they're going to be going to university. I've got lots of stresses financially. It's just so expensive at the moment. I just want to make sure that I can sort that out and I can then be there for the grandkids when hopefully that comes about. And I go, okay, yeah, I can see why you've just thrown yourself into work and to trying to build up that security for you and your family. But you're here now and you're explaining that you're suffering this, and you're suffering that. So what I do is I'll pick out the symptoms that they talked about and I'll repeat it back to them just so they realize, okay, so these are the things that they're struggling with. And I ask them, I go, why do you think this has happened? And sometimes they're on the ball, sometimes they don't understand. And so I'll try to paint the picture of actually it may be related to physical inactivity, to the kind of foods that you're having, the high stress that you're experiencing. What do you make of that? And I think that's really important as clinicians. We constantly get the patient to reflect back on what we say. As you see them hopefully growing in insight, you then go, okay, do you know what? This is not easy. And I appreciate that there's no quick solutions here. So you give it clear in terms of the reality. And you go, but what can we do and where do we want to get to? So we paint out what is the person. Let's just call him Jim. You say, Jim, tell me, what does good look like? And Jim goes, okay, well, I have energy, or I'm able to move my body a bit into the time that I've got, where I have the confidence to, feel that I'm going to have health for a long period of time, where I'm still able to do those things. When the grandkids come, I can play with them. I can go to the park, all that kind of stuff. I go, okay, let's work backwards. Let's work backwards and go, what do we need to be doing now to make doing that then a reality? So we go, okay, so we're going to need to be able to achieve these things. Okay, we can't achieve that right now. And so we paint the picture of what are the steps where we're going to get to that marker. And as soon as you get that, and you kind of work with the kind of person, if they're quite analytical, I really break it down and make it into kind of a nice flowchart that I get the patient to draw up. I actually get them to write it and to keep it. And I say, when you take this home, I want you to document this in the way that you like. If it's on the computer or you want to draw out properly, you do it. And then I want us to slowly work through it. If someone isn't quite like that and they prefer to more just focus on kind of how they feel, I get them to draw a map of what are the kind of feelings they want to experience, what are the kind of things that they want to achieve, whether it's confidence, less anxiety, etc. Because often a lot of people, they put their measures on the watch or on the weighing scales, and that's not where real health is gained. Stop tracking it that way. Because for example, let's say if someone's overweight, they're trying to lose weight. Physical activity is not going to be very effective at losing weight. Some of them may even gain a little bit because they gain muscle mass. But if they're just measuring the kilos, they're going to feel like they're failing, get demotivated, stop. So instead, they should be measuring how does it make them feel? And what are the other things they need to look for? Whether it's a body composition assessment in order to see, okay, I'm gaining muscle. Whether it's metrics like I'm now stronger, I can do X. So we really need to make sure that the view on the measures of success are correct and not going to take them down a demotivating path.
What are some of those key take-home messages that we could give to men to say, this is what you can do to make a real difference in your health, whether you're 20 or 70? How do we sort of bring that together?
I would say, work on your connections and relationships. Do small, achievable steps. Don't care about what other people are doing or what other people are saying. Just do what you want to do most that you know that's going to help, do it. And just understand that you are already good enough. That doesn't mean that you can't be better. You do those things and you just apply that each day and you will slowly move and get to places that you never dreamed of, right? I was last picked at school for all sports. I hated sport. And I remember when I started my first world championships in Ibiza, and I was at the start line, I actually went over to Shanaz and I was like, bloody hell, have you seen those people? I'm gonna die. and I was like, look at them, they're insane, they're ripped, they're like who the hell are these people? And she was like, you look like one of them. But in my head, I still looked like that same person. It takes time. You just gotta work at it and slowly your identity shifts.
If people want to follow you or learn more about the things you do, where's the best place for them to go?
Best place would be Instagram, which the handle is Iron Doctor Haz, H-A-Z, or LinkedIn for those that, let's say, professional and want to follow the kind of work and evidence that I share. That's just Hussain Al-Zubaidi.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. Do you have a mate who's going through a rough patch right now? Share this with them today, because one conversation can change a life.